So, this is gonna sound kind of random, but I swear it's not some weird stalker story or anything. More like one of those little things that just hits you out of nowhere and messes with your head for the better. It all started on an average Thursday night, the kind where I was too lazy to cook and even too lazy to go out. You know, one of those days when everything you want is just a few taps away on your phone, and somehow you convince yourself that ordering delivery is the smartest thing you've done all day. I was sprawled out on my couch, scrolling through the app, debating between pizza and something vaguely healthy, which I never actually order. Then the doorbell rang, and that's when he showed up. The delivery guy was maybe in his early 20s, wearing a baseball cap slightly tilted to the side, and he had this shy smile that didn't quite fit the usual, just here to drop off your food vibe. Something about him made me look up from my phone longer than I normally would. He handed over my order, and for a split second, our eyes met. Not in a creepy way, more like that quick, unexpected moment when you realize someone you just met might actually be worth remembering. I remember thinking, wow, he's actually kind of cute, and then I immediately felt dumb for noticing because, really, how often do you get that kind of moment from a delivery guy? So I said thanks, he said no problem, and that should have been it. But then, about 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but when I opened the message, it was him. He'd texted me from the receipt, which included the usual info, but below it was a simple message. Hey, thanks for the tip. Want to grab a coffee sometime instead of just handing me money? I stared at the screen, a mix of surprise and curiosity flooding in. Was this real? Had I just been hit on by my delivery guy? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? The thing is, I wasn't exactly great at these kinds of moments. I'm usually the guy who overthinks, who waits too long to reply, or somehow manages to mess things up before they even start. But there was something different here. Maybe it was the way he looked when he handed me the food, or maybe it was just the fact that someone took a chance in the middle of a routine night. Either way, I found myself typing back before I could talk myself out of it. And that's how a simple food delivery turned into something way more interesting than I ever expected. I typed back something dumb like, haha, that's a new one. Coffee sounds better than a tip. Then I stared at the screen, waiting for his reply like I was 16 again, and texting some crush for the first time. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I was more excited or nervous. I mean, this wasn't some planned date or anything. It was a random off-the-cuff thing that had somehow landed in my lap. And I wasn't sure if he'd regret texting me or if I'd regret responding. But I guess that's how these things go, right? He replied quickly, cool. I'm off in about an hour if you want to meet nearby. I checked the clock. An hour? That gave me just enough time to shove leftovers in the fridge, wash my hands, and get my shoes on without feeling like I was rushing. I sent back, sounds perfect. Where? He sent me an address a few blocks away, just a small cafe that I'd never really noticed before, but looked cozy enough. We agreed on 8 p.m., and I had to admit, I felt a little flutter of something I hadn't felt in a while. Anticipation, maybe? It was weird how quickly that little spark could sneak up on you when you least expected it. Fast forward an hour, and I'm sitting at a small table near the window, nursing a cup of black coffee that I wasn't sure I even liked, but drank anyway. The place was quiet, the kind of spot that felt like a secret hideout from the noisy city outside. And then, just like that, he walked in. He looked different from when I'd seen him at my door. No baseball cap, his hair a little tousled, but in a way that worked for him. His smile was still there, easy, genuine. He spotted me immediately and made his way over. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. Hey, I said, trying not to sound like a total goof. We started talking, and honestly, it was one of those rare conversations where it felt like time slowed down. He told me his name was Jamie, and yeah, he delivered food to pay the bills, but he was studying graphic design and hoped to land a real job once he graduated. I told him about my work, tech support for a small company. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. There was no pressure, no awkward silences that dragged on too long, just this easy back and forth that felt natural. At some point, we laughed about the fact that our meeting was basically set up by a food order and a receipt with a phone number. Jamie joked, who knew dinner came with a side of potential romance? I smiled, feeling that weird, warm thing in my chest that made it impossible to think about the night ending anytime soon. We stayed at the cafe for close to 2 hours, and when it was finally time to leave, Jamie looked a little hesitant. I guess I felt the same way because I asked, "So, do you want to do this again sometime?" He nodded, that easy smile showing up again, and said, "Yeah, I'd like that." Walking home later, I kept replaying the night in my head. How a guy who showed up with my dinner ended up sitting across from me, sharing stories and laughs over coffee. It was ridiculous, but it felt real, and more than that, it felt like the beginning of something. The next day, I found myself checking my phone more than usual, hoping for a text from Jamie. A couple of hours after lunch, I got one. "Hey, I know this might be sudden, but would you want to come with me to a small art show this weekend? It's part of this student thing at the college." I smiled to myself. It wasn't just a random text from a delivery guy anymore. It was an invitation. And for once, I was excited to say yes. I typed back, "I'd love to." So yeah, what started as just another boring Thursday night turned into something way better than I could have planned. I guess sometimes all it takes is a little courage and a text from an unexpected number to change your whole week. Or maybe even more. The weekend came faster than I expected. I wasn't sure if that was because I was excited or just because life moves at a pace that never really slows down. Either way, Saturday afternoon found me standing outside this tiny gallery tucked in the corner of a street I didn't even know existed. It looked unassuming from the outside. Just a simple brick building with a hand-painted sign that said something like Student Art Exhibit. I was early, which is so typical me. I was already starting to wonder if Jamie had bailed or if I'd somehow misunderstood the whole thing. But then he showed up. Messy hair, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and that same shy smile that was simultaneously calming and kind of thrilling. "Hey," he said, eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Hey," I answered, feeling that familiar clumsy nervousness flare up again. We slid inside together, and the place was basically a small room filled with student artwork, paintings, sketches, digital designs, and it struck me as surprisingly intimate, the kind of space where people poured their hearts into something and didn't really care if it was perfect or not. Jamie was animated as he pointed out different pieces. "This one's mine," he said, gesturing toward a vibrant digital painting that looked like a cityscape melting into abstract shapes. "I've been working on it for weeks." I looked closer and was honestly impressed. It wasn't just good. It was raw and emotional in a way that made me pause. "You're really talented," I told him. He shrugged, cheeks reddening a little. "Thanks. It's just a hobby for now, but I hope it can be more someday." We wandered through the rest of the exhibit, and the conversation flowed easily, the kind that feels effortless but somehow important. I found myself opening up more than I usually do on a first couple of dates. I told Jamie about my family, how I was the youngest, the only one who stayed in the city after college, and how my parents always joked that I was the most stubborn one. Jamie listened like it mattered, and when it was his turn, he shared stories about growing up in a small town, moving here for school, and the nervous excitement of trying to figure out who he was. By the time the exhibit was winding down, the room had emptied except for us and a couple of other latecomers. Jamie glanced at his watch, then back at me and asked, "Want to grab something to eat?" "I'm starving." I laughed. "After last week's food delivery, I think I'm starting to develop a taste for your recommendations." He grinned and led the way to a nearby taco place that looked like a hole in the wall but smelled amazing. We sat side by side on a bench, sharing tacos and trading stories about the weirdest things we'd ever eaten. Jamie confessed once eating fried crickets on vacation, which grossed me out but made him laugh so hard I almost choked on my taco. There was something about the way he talked, the way he smiled, and even the little nervous pauses as he tried to find the right words. It wasn't just that he was cute, though he absolutely was. It was that he felt real, like someone you could want to know better without all the usual bullshit. After dinner, we walked back toward the street where we'd met, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Maybe because neither of us wanted the night to end. Or maybe because we were both trying to figure out how to say what was on our minds without making it weird. Finally, Jamie broke the silence. "I'm really glad I texted you that night. I wasn't sure if it was too forward or if you'd think I was weird." I smiled. Honestly, I thought it was bold and weird, but mostly bold. And it worked. He laughed, that easy, genuine laugh that made my chest tighten in a good way. Guess sometimes you just have to take the chance. We stood there for a moment longer, the city lights flickering behind us, and then he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. It was a small, simple gesture, but it felt like the start of something. Walking home later, I kept replaying the night over and over. Not just the art, the tacos, or even the laughter, but the way I felt when Jamie touched my face, like maybe this was where I was supposed to be. When I got back to my apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a selfie from Jamie, grinning, eyes bright, with the caption, "Not just a delivery guy anymore." I chuckled, heart racing. I typed back, "Definitely upgrading your status." And just like that, the most unexpected text of my life turned into something I never saw coming but didn't want to let go. After that night, things shifted in a way I wasn't entirely prepared for. Suddenly, my phone was filled with messages from Jamie. Not just casual texts, but little check-ins, jokes, and sometimes random thoughts that felt like invitations into his world. It was weirdly comforting and borderline addictive. One evening, he texted me out of the blue. "Want to come over and help me pick paint colors?" My apartment is a disaster zone. I hesitated for a second, picturing a cramped student rental with mismatched furniture and maybe a suspicious smell of instant noodles. But curiosity won out, so I agreed. When I got there, it was nothing like I expected. His place was small but bright, with canvases stacked against the walls and a bunch of plants that looked like they might actually be alive. The furniture was a little mismatched, sure, but it had this lived-in vibe that made it feel homey. Jamie was standing in the middle of the living room, holding up paint swatches like he was about to make the most important decision of his life. "I've been staring at these for hours," he said with a grin. "Can you believe I'm this indecisive about beige?" I laughed and sat down on the couch. Beige is serious business, but maybe don't pick the one that makes the whole room look like a sandy desert. We spent the next hour debating colors, me throwing out completely ridiculous ideas just to see his reaction, and him trying to explain why a soft gray might actually be the way to go. It wasn't just about paint. It was about the way he talked about creating a space that felt like him, a little corner of the world that was his own. At some point, the conversation drifted to more personal stuff. Jamie told me about his family, how his parents didn't quite get the whole art thing but tried anyway, and how moving to the city was both terrifying and exhilarating. I shared some of my own stories, my insecurities about never really figuring out where I belonged, the pressure of always being the responsible one, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes settled in, even when I was surrounded by people. There was a softness in the way he listened, like he was holding my words carefully instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. It made me want to share even more, to open up parts of myself I usually kept locked away. Later, as I was about to leave, Jamie surprised me by pulling me into a quick hug. It was a simple thing, brief and unassuming, but it sent a jolt through me. I realized I was already starting to want more. More moments like this, more chances to be seen and understood. The next week was a blur of texts, coffee meetups, and stolen afternoons where we'd wander around the city, talk about everything and nothing, and laugh until our cheeks hurt. It felt like a slow dance, awkward at first, but growing smoother with each step. One night, after a late dinner at a tiny diner we discovered, Jamie looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup and said, "I know this might sound crazy, but I'm glad you were too lazy to cook that night." I smiled, feeling that same rush of warmth. Me too. But as things started to get better, I couldn't shake this tiny voice in the back of my head that whispered, "What if this doesn't last? What if it's just a fling or a nice story you tell someday?" I wanted to believe in us, in whatever us was becoming, but I was scared of getting hurt. So I kept my walls just a little higher, my answers a little more guarded, afraid that if I let go completely, I might fall too hard. One rainy evening, Jamie came over, soaked from the storm but grinning like he'd just won the lottery. We sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, and he turned to me with those earnest eyes and said, "I know I'm not perfect, Hell, I'm barely sure where I'm going most days. But I want to try this with you. I looked at him, feeling my heart pounding, and for once I didn't pull back. I reached out, took his hand, and said, "Me too." The rain tapped steadily against the window as we sat there, hand in hand, not needing to say anything more. It was messy, uncertain, and beautiful all at once. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. After that night, things between Jamie and me felt different. More real, I guess. It wasn't just casual dates or texting in bits and pieces anymore. We started carving out bits of our lives for each other, even if it was just small stuff, like sharing playlists, swapping books, or me showing up at the coffee shop he worked at on the weekends, just to watch him get a little flustered behind the counter. One Saturday afternoon, he invited me to a little get-together with some of his friends. I was nervous, not because I didn't want to meet them, but because I wasn't sure how to fit in with this new part of his world. Jamie's friends were an eclectic bunch, all art students or musicians, and they had this energy that was both chaotic and welcoming. As soon as I walked in, one of them gave me a thumbs up and said, "Jamie's told us all about you," which made me blush harder than I expected. The night was full of laughter, spontaneous jam sessions, and way too much cheap wine. Jamie and I stayed close, sneaking glances, sharing quiet smiles amidst the noise. There was this moment when he pulled me aside to the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us, and just held me. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical. It was just us, together in the middle of all that chaos, and it felt like the safest place I'd been in a long time. But as the weeks went on, I started noticing the little things that made me pause. Jamie's schedule was hectic. School, work, art shows, and sometimes he'd disappear for days without much warning, leaving me wondering if I'd done something wrong or if he was just exhausted. I tried to remind myself that this was normal, that life was messy, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. One evening, after a particularly long silence on his end, I decided to text him. "Hey, everything okay?" I waited, heart pounding. When he finally replied, it was with a short, "Yeah, just busy, sorry." It wasn't enough, and I knew it. So the next day, I showed up at his apartment, unannounced. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, I found Jamie curled up on the couch, looking exhausted and a little defeated. "Hey," I said softly. He looked up, surprised but relieved. "Hey, sorry I've been kind of MIA." I sat down next to him, and we talked, really talked, for hours. About the stress, the fear of failing, the pressure he put on himself to make his art matter. I told him about my own doubts, the fear of not being enough, and how much I wanted us to work but didn't always know how to show it. That night changed something. We both realized that even when things got messy or confusing or hard, we were willing to stick it out. It wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be, but it was ours. A few weeks later, Jamie surprised me again. He showed up at my door with a small, wrapped package in his hands. Inside was a framed print of that cityscape painting he'd shown me at the exhibition, the one that made me rethink what art even meant. "I wanted you to have this," he said, a little shy. "Because you're part of the story now." I felt my throat tighten, and as I pulled him into a hug, I realized that this unexpected delivery guy had become so much more than a random text on a receipt. He was someone I wanted to build something with, someone who made the everyday feel a little brighter. Looking back, it's wild to think about how a simple food order led to all this. But maybe that's the thing about love. It shows up when you least expect it, in the most ordinary moments, and somehow turns them into something extraordinary. That framed print sat on my living room shelf for weeks, catching light in the mornings and reminding me daily of how far things had come. Jamie and I were settling into this weird, wonderful rhythm, part comfort, part excitement, and a whole lot of figuring things out as we went. One Saturday morning, he called me earlier than usual. His voice was quieter than normal, almost hesitant. "Hey, can I swing by? I need to talk." Now, I don't know why, but when someone says I need to talk, my brain immediately goes to worst-case scenarios. I was pacing my apartment 20 minutes later when the doorbell rang. Jamie stood there, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, eyes searching mine like he was trying to decide how to start. I motioned for him to come in, and he stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. We sat down on the couch, and he took a deep breath. So, I got an offer for an internship. It's a big deal, paid with a lot of exposure, but it's in another city, like a few hours away. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't the first time he'd mentioned opportunities like this. He was ambitious, and it was part of what I admired about him. But hearing it out loud made it real. And scary. How do you feel about it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. Excited, obviously, but also conflicted. I don't want to mess up what we have. I don't want to lose this. I reached out, grabbing his hand. Jamie, you have to do what's best for you. I don't want to hold you back. He gave me a small smile but looked torn. I don't want this to be one of those stories where we say goodbye and then fade into separate lives. Neither did I. But the truth was, I didn't know how to promise what I wasn't sure I could keep. Long distance wasn't easy, especially when feelings were still fresh and everything was still finding its footing. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking through logistics, fears, and hopes. By the time he left, we didn't have all the answers, but we had a plan to try. We'd visit each other, call late at night, and be honest about how we were feeling, no matter how messy or complicated. The days after he left were weird. The apartment felt emptier, the silence louder. But every text, every phone call, reminded me that he was still there, still part of my life. One night, a couple of weeks in, he called me unexpectedly. His voice was shaky. I'm sorry, I miss you. It's harder than I thought. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. I miss you too. But we're doing this together, remember? He laughed softly. Yeah, together. There were ups and downs, of course. Times when the distance made things feel impossible, when the uncertainty crept in and made me question if we were really strong enough. But then there were moments like the surprise weekend he showed up at my door with a backpack and a goofy grin, ready to spend 2 days exploring the city with me. One of those days we wandered into a tiny bookstore, one of those magical places where the smell of old paper and coffee hangs in the air. Jamie found a notebook, a plain, almost boring one. This is going to be our project, he said, flipping it open. We write letters to each other, like real letters, about the good days, the bad days, random thoughts, something we can hold on to when it's hard. I loved the idea. That simple notebook became a lifeline. We wrote silly notes, deep confessions, lists of dreams. It was like weaving threads between us, keeping the connection alive even when miles apart. Months passed, and the internship ended. Jamie moved back, weary but full of stories and sketches from his time away. The reunion was awkward at first. Both of us changed in ways the other hadn't quite expected. But the bond we'd built, fragile and tested, held steady. One evening, sitting on my balcony with the city lights flickering below, he reached for my hand and said, I don't want to be just a story you tell someday. I want to be your story. I looked at him, the person who had come into my life like a random text and stayed through all the chaos and uncertainty. And I realized I felt the same. Then let's write that story together, I said, and so we did. No grand declarations, no perfect moments. Just two people figuring it out, day by day, text by text, heartbeat by heartbeat. And somehow, that was enough. After that night on the balcony, everything felt like it was shifting into a new gear, but not in some dramatic, game-changing way. More like a natural, comfortable progression. Like we'd crossed some invisible line from just dating to something that actually mattered. And honestly, it was both thrilling and terrifying. We started spending more time at each other's places, sometimes crashing on the couch with cheap takeout and terrible movies. Jamie's art started creeping into my apartment, prints taped up on the walls, sketches left on the coffee table. And I started showing up at his place, unannounced with coffee or random snacks, just because I knew he'd appreciate it. One lazy Sunday morning, we were lying in bed, the kind of slow, cozy day where the city outside feels miles away. Jamie was scrolling through his phone when he paused and looked at me with that smile I'd come to know so well. "Hey," he said, "I've been thinking about our story notebook." I raised an eyebrow. "The one with all the goofy letters and weird doodles? Yeah, I want to make it more permanent. Like, not just letters, but plans, memories, things we want to do together. Sort of like a roadmap." I liked the idea. Maybe more than I expected. "A roadmap, huh? So what's our first stop?" Jamie grinned and pulled me closer. "Dinner at that little Italian place you always talk about but never go to." It was the kind of simple plan that felt meaningful. Because it wasn't about grand gestures. It was about building something real, day by day. That dinner was one of those nights where time slows down just enough for you to savor everything. The food, the conversation, the way his hand found mine across the table. We talked about everything and nothing, our voices low so only we could hear. I caught myself thinking how lucky I was. How sometimes life surprises you with something better than you ever imagined. But, like any story worth telling, ours wasn't without its bumps. A few weeks later, Jamie got some unexpected news. His art professor was retiring early, and suddenly Jamie was offered a chance to showcase his work at a local gallery's group exhibition. The catch? It was only a few weeks away, and the pressure was intense. He told me one night over the phone, voice tight with stress, "I don't know if I can pull this off. What if it's a disaster?" I could hear the doubt cutting through the excitement. "Jamie, you're going to be amazing. You've worked so hard, and this is your chance to show people who you really are." He sighed. "Thanks, I just don't want to let you down." "Hey," I said, "there's no way you could let me down." The days leading up to the show were intense. Jamie was juggling school, work, and this huge project, and I could tell it was wearing on him. I tried to be there as much as I could, bringing over dinners, helping him set up his pieces, or just being a quiet presence when his head was spinning too fast. The night of the exhibition arrived, and I stood in the crowd, watching Jamie talk to people, his face lighting up with passion as he explained his work. There was something magnetic about him in those moments. Confident, alive, exactly where he was meant to be. Later, as the gallery started to empty, Jamie found me and pulled me into a hug that felt like a release of everything he'd been holding in. "I couldn't have done this without you," he whispered. I smiled against his hair. "I'm just glad I got to be there." We left the gallery that night feeling like we'd crossed another milestone. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about our journey was, but it was ours. And that made all the difference. Back at my apartment, we curled up on the couch, tired but happy, and Jamie pulled out the notebook. "Ready to add some new pages?" he asked. I nodded, and as we started writing, plans for the future, silly notes, dreams, and fears, I realized that the best part of this whole crazy story wasn't the grand moments or the big milestones. It was the in-between, the everyday stuff, the quiet connection that kept growing. One text, one smile, one shared moment at a time. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Months passed after that exhibition, and Jamie and I settled into a rhythm that felt less like a whirlwind and more like something steady, something worth holding on to. We weren't perfect. There were still moments when life got messy, when work or school or just exhaustion made us snap or pull away. But we kept coming back to each other, to those small gestures and quiet conversations that built the foundation beneath it all. One evening, we found ourselves back on my balcony, the city lights sprawling beneath us like a million tiny stories. Jamie pulled the well-worn notebook from his bag, the one that had traveled with us through long distances, late nights, and unexpected challenges. He flipped to the last blank page and looked at me. "Want to write something here? Like a promise or a hope?" I smiled, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through, the early texts from a receipt, the nervous first coffee, the long-distance calls, the art shows, the late-night talks. None of it had been effortless, but it had been real, and it had all led us here. I took the pen and wrote, "No matter where life takes us, we'll figure it out together." Jamie reached over, caught my hand in his, and squeezed gently. "Together." We sat back, quiet, watching the city hum below us. In that moment, It wasn't about grand declarations or flashing neon signs. It was about two people choosing each other, again and again, in the everyday moments that really count. Looking back, it feels almost unbelievable how a simple food delivery turned into a connection that surprised me, challenged me, and ultimately changed me. Maybe love really does show up in the most unexpected places, and maybe, just maybe, the best stories aren't the ones we plan, but the ones we're brave enough to live. And as I sit here now, thinking about how far we've come, I realize that sometimes the smallest moments, a smile, a text, a shared coffee, can lead to the biggest changes. Jamie isn't just the guy who delivered my food or sent me a text from a receipt anymore. He's the person I want to build my story with, page by page, day by day. And honestly, I can't wait to see where it goes next.